Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And as an introduction to your way of thinking, neither Russian nor Ukrainian, how can you explain this military operation that is going to affect not only Ukraine and Russia, not only Europe, but the whole world?
Well, my view is that this has very little to do with Ukraine, that Ukraine is being used as a proxy for a Western warfare against Russia and China. We've seen a buildup over the last months of tension in the South China Sea as well as Ukraine in the Black Sea, and there's a reason for it. The Western financial system is collapsing, and Russia and China are forming an integrated economic union in Eurasia. Now, students of history know that from the standpoint of especially the British Empire, but now the Anglo-American Empire, the greatest threat is an alliance of Eurasia with Europe. And there had been significant attraction for German business, French, Italian, and others for trade with Russia and China. Now, the separate issue of Ukraine is President Putin's demands for security guarantees. And I would point out to your listeners that what Putin is asking in a demilitarization of Ukraine, denazification of Ukraine, and no NATO in Ukraine is not so different from what President John F. Kennedy asked for in 1962 when he demanded that Khrushchev remove the nuclear missiles from Cuba. We almost went to nuclear war over that, but fortunately there was a back channel established and there was an agreement to move away from the brink of war. Now the problem here is that, in my view, Ukraine is a puppet state. Since the 2014 coup, it was a regime change coup run by Western interests to overthrow a democratically elected regime. It's important to recognize that the U.S. has a history recently of these kinds of attacks in Libya, in Iraq, in Syria, where the U.S. is destabilizing governments that won't go along with the Western economic policy. And now we see them targeting Russia and China. And the reason for this, as I said at the outset, is the financial system in the West is crumbling. It's overloaded with debt, and there's the push for the so-called Great Reset, which means no sovereign nation can resist the demands of the International Monetary Fund and the international bankers. So I think that's what we're looking at in Ukraine. And the possibility of a settlement is going to come when the Western leaders realize that they're not going to be able to back down the Russians.